So this is an amazing experience that was shared by Maslow. And we owe Stan Krippner just a tremendous debt for taking the time to really realize and get this and realize how important this is and get this into the scholarly literature. The amazing thing about Maslow, again, is that this is what he studied. You know, he was very, very familiar with these types of ideas. So to be able to experience and comment on them firsthand makes him a very powerful commentator for us. And in fact, it's these types of experiences that typically are used by scholars when researching non-symbolic consciousness. It's basically all about self-reports. It's a lot of introspection and phenomenology, meaning that people are looking inside themselves and they're trying as best they can to distill down what they're experiencing and describe it for the rest of us. That's nice, but that's, only really able to go so far. Really, we have to take people at their word when we're talking about that type of data or that type of evidence. Now, fortunately for us, there's been so much of this that it's been just massively compared. And so you've got a lot of people that have analyzed these from many, many different perspectives, from theoretical and philosophical perspectives, from the psychology of religion perspective, from you name it. Another type of data about these states comes from surveys. And here I'm really talking mostly about surveys of the population at large. So how many people experience this? Well, it's interesting because a lot of the survey research seems to suggest somewhere between maybe 20 to 30% of people have had a non-symbolic experience. But it's actually a little bit false sort of on the surface, because when you actually dig into those with in-depth interviews, what you find is that it's very, very difficult to give someone a survey and to have them accurately be able to report whether or not they've had a non-symbolic experience. So surveys have their limits, and even though you may have 20 to 30% or so of people report that they've had these experiences, in reality, when you start drilling down into them with in-depth interviews and things like that, that number knocks way down, somewhere in the 1 to 10% range. No one knows exactly. And of that 1 to 10%, we're talking about an almost entirely temporary form of these states. So we're probably talking about 1%, less than 1% of people, maybe way less than 1% of people who have had these on a persistent basis. And there's really no work on that. There's no research that has sort of explored that number in the broader population. From an academic standpoint, we need to have something called an operational definition to do research. Now, that's very helpful for you and I because we're trying to define what these states are. That's really all we're talking about with an operational definition, is a definition that's good enough to do research on. Now, in Western psychology, these definitions go back quite a ways. So you can see one from about 100 years ago. It's a very famous one from Starbuck's look at religious conversion experiences. And Starbuck basically boiled down about 7 points: self-surrender, determination to change, forgiveness from God, divine aid, public confession, spontaneous awakening, and a sense of oneness with God. Now remember, these are Christian religious conversion experiences that Starbuck studied, which are an absolutely, in their most potent form, an absolutely valid form of non-symbolic experience. If we jump forward about 100 years, there's a very well-known psychologist of religion, a great researcher named Spolka, and here are his categories: a sense of the presence of the divine, feelings of unity and completeness, impressions of reverence, sacredness, and holiness, awareness of new knowledge and spiritual enlightenment, positive emotions of happiness, joy, and peace, a variety of strong emotional and physical reactions, admittedly a very vague sort of category, some evidence of extreme sensory stimulation, and possibly hallucinatory behavior. There's a lot of other boiled down lists like this that are out there. But notice that even though these lists are separated by 100 years, and Starbucks basically dealt with Christian religious conversion experiences, where Spilk is trying to be more broad in the analysis of these, there's still a lot of similarities between them. And that's the argument for the common core or unity thesis behind all of this. The most well-known is by Stace. And Stace basically boils it down to 5 main points. That these experiences have a unitive quality, a noetic quality, and a noetic quality, if I go back a graphic, is basically Spilka's point number 4, awareness of new knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. So it's this type of knowledge that can come in. That's what we mean when we refer to noetic quality. A transcendence of space and time. Deeply felt positive mood. It's paradoxical and ineffable. People have a tremendous difficulty trying to put it into words and trying to explain what it was like. They basically say, there's no way for me to explain this, which is why someone like Rumi, his poetry was what tried to express it. And there's been a lot of that out there. There's been a lot of poetry that's been generated by these states. Other people really take a crack at it. Lester Levinson, Peter Fenner, Aurobindo. These are the core elements. If we want to think about what is it that a non-symbolic experience embodies, it's really these core elements that it embodies. Now notice Stace goes on to define 2 other categories, introvertive and extrovertive. People that do a lot of meditation that just go in and in and in and in and in until they hit sort of these unity type experiences. That's a good example of an introvertive type experience. Maslow's experience is a very good example of an extrovertive experience. It's sort of unity in that external world. And there's debate, sort of along the lines of, do you first get an introvertive and then it becomes an extrovertive type experience? And there's arguments both ways. And certainly it's not uncommon for people to have both of these experiences, as well as for people to have these experiences independent of each other.